Minnie Quartey Annan is the Vice President of Impact and Innovation for Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Washington and has been working for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Washington since 2012. She has been in youth development for over 20 years, aiming to provide a space of equity, exposure, and empowerment for all young people, helping them see possibilities instead of problems. Minnie completed her doctoral studies at Georgetown University with a degree in sociolinguistics. Her dissertation explored how African American language speakers in the Washington, D.C. area construct particular local identities through storytelling and vowel centralization. Can I try it, Minnie? Maryland versus Merlin.
There you go.
I did it.
There you go.
Okay, all right. I'm from Los Angeles, y'all. Give me a little credit for that one, right?
Yeah.
Her research has been featured on the front page of the Washington Post. She has been a guest on NPR, and she was the primary field researcher for the first publicly accessible corpus of regional African American language funded by the National Science Foundation. Yes. Yes. Give them flowers. Yes. Minnie is still very connected with Georgetown University, serving as adjunct faculty, a longtime board member of the Patrick Healy Fellows, and a champion of the Center for Multicultural Equity and Access. Amazing, Minnie. Tony Keith Jr. is an award-winning Black U.S. American gay poet, spoken word artist, and hip-hop educational leader from Washington, D.C., y'all. Or you can just call him an Ed MC. Love it. He is the author of How the Boogeyman Became a Poet. Signed copies available for purchase in the Present Perfect gift shop in the lobby. And Knucklehead, which is set to be released on February 25th, 2025. You can also visit TonyKeithJr.com for pre-orders, yes? Okay, I'm just gonna plug that in there for you. I got you. All right. A multi-year fellow of the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, Tony has featured performances at John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, Washington National Cathedral, Historic Lincoln Theater, Busboys and Poets, and in schools and communities around the world, including South Africa, Tanzania, Trinidad and Tobago, and many more. You getting around, Tony? His poem, Black Man on Fire, won first prize in the Tom Howard Margaret Reed Poetry Contest, and his performance of Code Switched is featured in the award-winning documentary series Talking Black in America and published in Centering Possibility in Black Education. Please join me in giving all the love to Minnie Quartey Annan and Tony Keith Jr.
All right, let's do this, Doc. You ready? Thank you. What's up, y'all?
Oh, okay.
All right, so we've been told that we kind of have a lot of it's like a bit of a blank slate opportunity. So a moment for us to kind of chat amongst each other, and of course, get some questions from you all. So I figured maybe we do that. But I would like, if you can, maybe you'll do what you can. But first, I'd like to, if I can, share a little bit of a story about how Minnie and I even sort of got to this point, if that's all right. So yes, that was me in the documentary. I had a lot less hair. But I am Tony Keith Jr. I'm from DC. This is my hometown. I'm really excited about that. I love sharing that because I love that institutions like Planet Word continue to invest in local authors and artists and educators, and that just means a lot. Thank you, Ann, and so many others. All right, so what had happened was 2012, when you were at the Boys and Girls Club in Southeast at the Arc. I was running a college prep program for DC public students at Washington National Cathedral. And that's when we just sort of really just kind of bumped into each other at that time, realizing we were both educators, realizing we were both passionate about young people, especially those from the DC area, and that we had this cultural background. We both then entered doctoral programs at very kind of like different times. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I tell Minnie, I was like, I'm a spoken word artist and I'm interviewing people who are poets, spoken word artists, rappers, and MCs who work in DC and around the country. And I'm like, I'm so trying to figure out what it is that we do for, marginalized learners in education. And I was like, I have this question though. I'm like, spoken word, like for me, it really, really means something. Cause I'm like, my ancestors, enslaved Africans, were already speaking a language. Right? Yeah. Yoruba, Itwa, Swahili, they were already speaking a language and then enslaved, and then white people are looking at them telling them they need to speak something else without giving them access to the written word, without giving them books and pencils and pens and a formal education. So there was this wonderful feat that my ancestors did, and they developed this language that makes a they, a that, a this, right? Well, you talking about Maryland and Merlin, but there was sort of an evolution of a language, and it happened because of survival. And I've been so fascinated by that concept. So when I think about African American vernacular English from that perspective, I'm always more interested in how Black language functions for us, whereas I think, Minnie, you're more into the systematic linguistic structure of it all. So say about that.
Yeah. So it is good to see you all. Thank you. This is what I love to do. I see one of my former students.
Hey, y'all.
Because I think the work is so important, right? And I'm going to say a statement that we can unpack. No one hates the language. We hate the speakers of that language.
Facts.
And so, because if we were talking about, I don't know, French American language, for example, no one would be like, oh, no, that's bad. That's wrong. Because we think French culture is refined, right? And so the focus is, and what I like to do and what I focus on is really this idea of elevating by educating about the language, right? Because what I want you to do is eradicate some of these thoughts, especially the negative ones, most definitely. Move that out of your mind and say, let me look at this, not because I'm looking at how society tells me to think about these people, but I'm looking at this for the value of the linguistic system. I'm looking at it for the rules, for the complexities, for the nuances, right? And so that's where I actually didn't know anything about what linguistics was.
Right.
I came to Georgetown. I came to Georgetown to study politics. I took my first government class. I said, who's doing this for 4 years? And so I no longer did that. Now, fast forward to my second semester of my first year, I had to take some, like your prereqs, and I had to take a class. And it was in this building, and I saw there was another prereq that I could fill, and it didn't meet on Fridays. As a freshman, you're like, oh, no Fridays, right? I love that for me. And so I took this, and I signed up, and I was like, what is a linguistic? I don't even know what a linguistic, what is a none of that, right? And I walk into class, and there is this old white guy. And I can say it like that because that's how he describes himself. And even in my dissertation, my homage to him is this old white guy. And this ultimately he ended up being one of the grandfathers, if you will, of African American language and studying its systematicity and researching it in a quantitative way. And that
Flex,
was
I don't know. That's a whole lot of brilliant things that just okay. I just want.
But ultimately, that was the first time I felt validated. I felt appreciated. One, as a Black speaker, as a Southern speaker, and as a woman. And so I said, well, this is something I have to explore. So then I got an undergrad, I got a master's, and I got a PhD in it. Because I think what's so critical is elevating this. So Tony, we talk about, you talk about how it functions in society and culture, and I do that as well. But I think in order for us to we want to explore both sides of these coins, because what you want to understand is you want to have that conversation to say, here is a system, not errors.
Right.
This is not, they're not
Right.
mistakes.
Right.
Here is a linguistic system. Now let's talk about how we all use it in various ways.
Yes.
And I think that's where the film hopefully drives you to think about and really move and flex there.
Mm-hmm. Come on, Doc. I love this brilliant conversation we're having.
We fangirl and fanboy off for each other, so just let us be great.
All day.
Let us
And
be
there
great.
are what 5 parts of this series?
This
I
is
think?
this is the last piece.
Yeah. So you all should definitely watch it. There are multiple, like we're engaged in lots of conversation in the documentary. But something that I was alluding to in this section of the documentary is I remember being all throughout schools, but especially around like middle school, high school, when teachers are trying to prepare us for college. And I remember being in AP English, and I write about this in my debut book, How the Boogeyman Became a Poet. Yes, I'm gonna read a little bit because I want to flex something. And I write about how I'm in my AP English class, and most of my English teachers, honestly, in formal education, have been white women. Not that that's a bad thing, but what would typically happen is I was often told that I spoke wrong. Or I wrote wrong. There was something about, Tony, you need to enunciate a little bit better. You got to pronunciate. You need to, I did not know, I didn't have language for code switch. I did not know that I was being told in those moments, there's something wrong with you, little Black boy. You need to perform better. I just sort of learned let me articulate myself. I found myself needing to enunciate, right? And articulate and project and all that. And I was good at that because I'm a poet, right? And so I think that there was something about, I just wish that they would have just said, well, there's nothing wrong with the way there's nothing wrong with you. There is, however, a standardized American English where these tests are going to measure you. And so therefore, we need to figure out how do we celebrate you and get you to pass this ridiculous thing that's rooted in racism, right? Exactly, exactly. And so what I did was on page 43 of this book, because I'm a man of text. By the way, I fully believe in translation. I think that's something ancestors were like, yo, Tony, we learned how to code switch, and I want to talk to you about what that means. Here it is, because I think I'm going to give this book to somebody else. But I write, this is what it looks like. All right, on page 44 of this book, I'm in my English class. And this is a memoir, by the way. It's all written in verse, which means each page is sort of structured like poetry. And it's how did I become the first person in my family to go to college, how did I start coming out the closet as gay, and how I discovered poetry is sort of my jam. But there's a section where I say, because I be thinking about this and end up saying that. And then I'll say this when I really mean that. And then I mean them. When I think of them, I end up saying them. My speech gets all twisted and confused with my writing sometimes. Feels like I'm constantly trying to decipher some code to balance the weight of words that be falling out of my brain with the words that be falling out of my mouth, as if there's some kind of black version of English embedded somewhere inside the African-American parts of my pink tongue. Right? I think so much about like how as a kid, now as an adult, I've got language to describe what was going on. But I made sure that when I wrote this book, I wrote about African-American vernacular English on purpose because I want young readers to be like, wait a minute, what's that? Do I speak that? There's a word for this thing that I have? What? Mm-hmm.
You feel seen, right?
Yes.
I think that's the biggest piece is you need to think about the reason that moments like this, the reason that this room is important, because each of you have an elevated voice, right? You have the power to advocate. There are those who speak, but yet have no voice. And that's why this work is important, right? That's why finding language, that's why understanding what a linguistic was, right? That's why finding language to describe this idea of code switching. That's the dexterity of being able to code switch. Because that is linguistic dexterity at its best. Yes. That in and of itself is not something that everyone can do.
That's right, right.
And so I think that that's where, you know, this education piece is that you're not focusing on just, oh, you know what? Why do they speak with all those errors? Why do they say all that like that? No, I know why they say this and those, this and that, right? As opposed to these and those. It's not that those sounds aren't available to them, but there are certain linguistic rules that they're following in a very systematic way so you can predict when it will happen. And I think that's the difference as opposed to an error. Errors happen, you know, mistakes, you're gonna fall. If I'm gonna fall, I can't predict that I will fall in 5 minutes and we hope that does not happen, right? That was a mistake. But if I get up and I'm telling myself to walk over and go out that curtain or go to that door, I am doing something, I am controlling that. Language is the same way. And that's exactly what these types of film and these types of moments, books like this, books like Spoken Soul, book like Jessie Greaser, who's in the film, she has The Black Side of the River, if you're into DC work, that's what those kinds of books teaches you. And the Oxford Dictionary that's coming out, right? Because for the first time, think about, for those of you who are African-American language speakers, and I didn't say black, right, because African-American language speakers, you don't have to be black to be an African-American language speaker, and not all black people speak African-American language. Well done. So let's be very clear about that. Well done. Now, but when that dictionary comes out, right? You know, anytime you need something, you're gonna go look at Merriam-Webster or you know, Oxford English, right? To say, oh, well, what does pontificate mean? What does exacerbate mean? What does recapitulate mean, right? Now we can go look, what's kitchen mean? What's busting? What's flex, right? There is a certain level of validation there. And that's the beauty, that in and of itself is social justice, right? When you elevate one group, a social group, and you're elevating their experience, that's social justice at its root, at its core.
And yes, and validating the black speakers. And I think so much about like how, and this is true, I get on family members sometimes who have young kids. And my little niece one day had said something like, Mommy, I ain't about to do, but she says, no, you don't say I ain't, you say I am not. And I was like, leave that little girl alone. You know, like that is natural language for her. She knows what she's saying, right? And I think that's what we really just need to understand is that there's nothing wrong with the ways in which we need to define language to communicate about our world. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And so when I think about, when I go to high school sometimes, they're like, hey, Mr. Keith, yeah, man, me and my man, we was going uptown to go see Lil Young, and then, yeah, you know what I mean? And I know exactly what he's saying, right? It's a whole story that I done pictured in my head, and I'm like, I got it, you know what I mean? But also, like, how, you know, like the freedom to just be able to speak how you speak. I think about how when I'm at home with my family, my friends, we don't be code switching. We talk how we talk. My grandmother still says Tess's. grandson, you got all the smarts. I wasn't good on tests. I'm not gonna tell my grandmother she speak wrong, right? 85-year-old black woman survived racism. Like, are you kidding me? Anyway, so I think there's just something to be said about the validating. And so I'm really excited because I now see documentaries about this that did not exist when I was a kid, right? And to be like, oh my gosh, there's now scholarship. There's now people with PhDs and researchers and museums and people that are celebrating this language. And I thought about this show, and I'm gonna cut this short because I talk too much, but I get excited. I remember when the pandemic hit, and I wound up writing a journal article published in the Journal of Negro Education at Howard University. Thank you. It's called I don't think there's any kids in here. Well, the title of the book is "We Jai Like Sick of That Ish Mo." Killed toward the emancipation of black education. For those who don't know what that means, we jai like sick of that ish mo means like, yo, we're frustrated with white supremacy and racism. There's we jai functions as like a verb for a lot of people in the DC DMV area. So we jai over there, jai this. It's like a description. I don't know if it's a word. I published that because I was thinking to myself, like, I wonder, now that everybody was on stay-at-home orders, this is what I thought about. I was like, all these black kids who were forced to code switch in schools are no longer learning inside of the schools. They're not learning back in their homes. Most of them are speaking their normal black language in their homes all day, and now they're gonna take some standardized tests. I wonder what that test is gonna say about their English. I've been thinking about that, and so now when I think about these standardized tests now that are coming out in the post-pandemic era, I'm like, y'all forgot about the fact them black kids was at home for a couple of years, speaking how they speak, you know what I mean, without people regulating their language. And I'm like, don't tell them they speak wrong and bad. Yeah.
No, I love that, and I know I want to open it for questions, but let's take this away from black people for a second. So let's pretend that we have a German speaker, and I'm going to continue on with French, right? We have a German speaker and a French speaker, and you wouldn't say that the German speaker is speaking bad. They're speaking French is bad German. No, it's different. It's French, right? And so African American language is not bad English. It's different, right? And so I think the thing, like, Tony's talking about, if you want to evaluate, I always look at this idea about evaluate people and put them where they are, right? If you want to evaluate a fish climbing a tree, of course the fish is going to fail every time. But if you want to evaluate how a fish swims, you're setting that fish up for success to perform the task that you're asking. Yeah. So if you ask a German speaker to perform well on a French test and they don't know French, you're going to be like, oh, that makes sense, right? But you're asking an African-American language speaker to perform on a mainstream American English test, and they don't do as well as you think they should. Why don't you validate them the same way that German speaker who took the French test? Yeah, well done. And that's the level that we need to start thinking about this, because what happens is African-American language, as Tony was talking about, it comes from West African languages, right? But the reason that we often think it's bad English is because it's West African structure with the English lexicon. And so you see it as English, but really it's not functioning like what we see as English is functioning. And that's where we have the challenges. And then we're gonna add the other fact. So that's the if we just look at systems. Now let's look at people. So when you add the social component, then we just get into a whole lot of other mess. But we can save that for Q&A.
We can. Last thing I'll say before the Q&A is we are at this rise of AI and technology and voice recognition. And you all should know that Dr. Minnie Quartey and I, we've been engaged in all sorts of really fun research projects. I'm on one right now with Howard University. They've been thinking about the fact that, well, Alexa and Google Assist, and some of them don't really recognize the way a lot of black folks speak. So, hey, Alexa, get this. And Alexa's like, I'm going to play Jim Jones or whatever, like that's not what I said. I don't know about y'all, but I find myself arguing sometimes with my voice recognition device. And so there are folks recognizing now, like, wait a minute, we also now need to start phonetically making sure that we spell this out, that we create these linguistic trees so that these computer systems recognize what's going on so that black folks' voices literally will not get erased in this new age of technology. So I'm just glad to see that AAVE is really getting this kind of, it's up in there, yeah. So, thanks, y'all. Hi. All right. What do y'all want to know? Happy to answer all kinds of questions. I'm going to spit a poem for y'all later, but what you want to know?
Questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. All right.
Yeah, right here. My friend right here.
Thank you. It seems like the idea of even a standardized version of a language is almost broken. Do you really accept the idea of a standardized version of a language? For example, in Italy, I mean, there are a million dialects, and they're constantly searching for the pure Italian almost pointlessly. So And our language is always evolving and changing. So I just wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, language happens fast enough that we can see it change, and it happens slow enough so it's not chaotic. And so when you think about that and you put it in the context of this idea of the ever elusive standard, the reason that that will never happen, I mean, you can define it as you like, but the reason that will never happen is because as soon as you set the standard on Monday, by Thursday, there's something else. That's the first thing. But the second thing, as much as language happens and it's about culture, it's also about power. And so when you have this, let's say you have little dialect A, you have little dialect B, and you have little dialect C. And they all have systematicity. They all are beautiful, right, in their own right. But dialect C got the money, they got the army. Dialect C has become the standard.
There we go. Yeah.
So it's really this elusive because power shifts, control shifts, but systematicity doesn't, right? So it's not about what the language is. It's once again the social aspects that deal with the language. And that's why this notion of a true standard is always going to be elusive, and you're never going to arrive at that place because powers are going to shift and the social context of that standardization is also going to shift, but also language in and of itself is ever changing. Yeah. So when we go back, like Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare was rogue. He was a maverick in his day, but now we hail that as the standard. Like, oh, that's Shakespearean English. Okay, we didn't even like Shakespeare back then. We thought he was a hot mess, right? But that's the power of the work. And so this idea, you're absolutely right. Because power shifts and the idea of who gets to control the power, and also language is going to, as languages contact, touch each other, right? People move about, and we can move now a lot more than we could, whether that's physical movement or social media or the internet, right? We have movement, so we have this fluidity of language connecting with touching other languages, right? So we're going to see this standard shift each and every day. Probably not enough that you'll see it from Monday to Tuesday, but from 2024 to 2029, you're gonna be like, wow, we don't even say that anymore, right? Yeah. And that's why that happens.
Yeah, I would also offer a shout out to, I love Doctor. I'm also thinking so much about something probably a little bit like more micro. I think about just the sheer fact, right? Because I'm an educator and I always think about the educational space. When I think about standard, I think about assessments, standardized assessments. That's kind of where my brain goes, especially when it comes to language. And I'm like, yo, it is proven that 80% of the educated workforce, at least in the United States, are made up of white people. This does not mean that white people are bad. What I'm saying is the perspective in which a lot of educational policies, educational tests, curriculum design, pedagogy evaluation are coming from the perspective of white people. And so I would say that then the standard is socially constructed to be like white, right? And so for me, I'm like, I will never, ever live by that standard. It just won't work for me. But I think so much about these systems that were created from those perspectives, and they are then regarding the standard. So yeah, it's about power. It's about power. Yeah. Yeah. I'm like for SATs, let me perform. Shoot, instead of let me, you know what I mean? Like make it a rap battle. What? Black kids be in Ivy League schools every day. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Something I was really struck by watching this documentary is that how important it is to study and how important it is to educate. And watching this documentary, it's a pretty recent documentary. You see articles from 2024, but I felt like there was this dark cloud hanging over. And the main question I had was the president released an executive order titled Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing. And one of the directives is federal grantees who receive federal funding to provide or advance DEIA or environmental justice programs, services, or activities since January 2021. And I Googled just, almost every single person interviewed in this documentary is a linguist, right? And I Googled, where does linguistic funding come from? It comes from the National Science Foundation. Wow. It comes from the National Endowment of Humanities. Minnie, in your bio, you had a National Science Foundation grant. And with this executive order and all these agencies complying, these programs, the field of linguistics, like we need to study this, not just for Black language, but for gay or queer language, right? There's only like a couple of articles on like what is the Asian American accent, right? And so I think there's a lot of fear of even being able to speak up about this, about this is not normal, right? And so I don't know, I'm curious as to, you guys work in the space day to day, how have these executive orders been affecting your work, number one, and two, what do we do? Because we cannot be heading in this direction. We are going down that direction, and it's
Yeah. Thank y'all. Please clap that person up. Seriously. I was just gonna say, but I was gonna say that I believe in consumption and production, meaning sometimes what we consume is typically what we produce. I'm someone who I will read the headlines, I know what's happening, right? But I will not consume all of that because I'm an artist, I'm a poet. I don't operate in fear and anxiety, and I can only operate in joy and love. And so I look to folks like museums and local libraries and indie bookstores and nonprofit organizations. I promise you there's a counter response currently occurring. Pay attention to that counter response, right? That's what I would say, yeah. Protect your peace. Yeah. Maybe read the headlines, but listen to your favorite music and just some love, because you gotta pour that into yourself. You have to, okay? Yeah.
So I kind of have two strands, right? So in the academic space, right, in my adjunct work with Georgetown, but also just my work with students and my focus there, but I also work for Boys and Girls Clubs. And Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Washington is 93% non-white, right? So I am sitting on a town hall on Tuesday talking about how do we protect if our number one priority is safety, how do we protect our kids if ICE comes to the door? Right? What are public and private spaces in our buildings, right? And so I bring that up not to be, because I don't want this to turn into that, let me be very clear, but I bring that up to say it's happening. But one of the things is that, once again, going back to this idea of let's celebrate and let's I think Tony's right? Consume a little to stay informed. Don't consume enough to turn you. Right? Don't consume it so much that you lose sight of the good things. If you want to do something that makes your heart feel great and feel free, come volunteer at Boys and Girls Club, because you will see young people who, in spite of their parents maybe getting deported, they are still finding time. Most of those kids in the film, that was filmed at Boys and Girls Club. And so that Black boy joy, that Black girl magic, I get to see that every day. But I also get to see, I had a young lady, she was giving a speech today, and she was doing all the things, and yet in the back of her mind, she's worried about her undocumented mother, right? But she finds that solace, she finds that community, she finds that outlet. And so when I talk about linguistics, that's the outlet for me. When I can educate and people have that light bulb moment, just have one. My goal is for people just to have one light bulb moment. And that's my goal in my class. That's my goal with my team. That's just how I live life, is to give people that one light bulb moment. So find something that gives you that one light bulb moment, not things that dim your light.
And for those of you who do, clap it up for Minnie. For those of you who do a lot of phone scrolling, I've set my screen times, I've had to, but sometimes it might just mean to adjust your algorithm too, right? That's something I've had to learn to do. And so now if I am scrolling, I'm only looking at pictures of beautiful Black people and listening. It's always like sort of stuff that feeds the thing. I'm consuming what I'm trying to produce. And so sometimes it's a shift of your algorithm or your frequency, whatever that might mean for y'all. These are great questions. Thank you for your brave answer. Yeah, great question. I see one here and one in the back too.
We'll start in the back and then we'll come to.
Go for it.
Oh, I'm sorry. We'll come to the one in the front.
Could you call the people by name out here? How did you do that?
Oh, it's on me? Oh,
yeah.
on
okay.
You got the mic, bro.
I thought I've heard someone else. My bad. My question for you two is, tell me a little bit more on your thoughts as it pertains to the globalness of like AAVE, particularly. For instance, you have companies that's like, I see a Metro PCS ad. We all fam up in here, or specifically like celebrities, right? I'm not gonna call out a couple names. But celebrities who have used AAVE, and your thoughts on that globalization of like the language by people who obviously don't know how to use it, and even particularly by companies as well. I'm curious.
Yo, the noises that are coming from Go ahead. What you thinking? Go ahead.
I'm gonna say this, right? So
ahead.
one of the things I talk about is you can appreciate, don't appropriate.
Come on.
And so in these spaces, if your goal is truly to connect, right? Marketing is real. And if you do data analytics and you understand your markets and you want to speak to those specific markets, you're going to do things that speak to those specific markets. Yep. And so if you show me that you're doing that to appreciate and connect, no problem. It's when the appropriation, and I like to say misappropriation, right, comes in, that's where the challenge, because now you're getting into, I might be kind of racist, right? I might be insensitive. You're getting into that territory. So you can appreciate all day long, but don't appropriate. And so when you talk about this idea of globalization, I get it, right? But at the end, we need to use that for our good, right? So we need to use it because it's becoming awareness, but we also need to make sure that we're educated. So when we see something that's not quite right, or they're saying you don't say this, or you say this, or you can't say it like this, right? Or they saying it clearly wrong. Like if it has rules, that means the rules can be broken, right? And so when a rule is broken, call them out, right? Because that's the level, that's where you have to be the education, or we have to be the educators, right? And I think the other piece is, at the end of the day, when you think about this notion of people coming into the community, you can I don't want to even say borrow, but you can most definitely use, don't abuse. And so if they're coming into the community to connect with others and connect our communities worldwide, we'll go with that. But in these cases where we're seeing appropriation, I don't like that. I don't like it for monetary gain. If it, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm trying to hit, 17-year-old boys, but you're not doing anything that 17-year-old boys would do. You're doing what you think 17-year-old Black boys would do, and you have no idea the cultural market that you're targeting. That's when it becomes a challenge for me. And those are the spaces when companies ask me, hey, can you come and do a workshop? Yep, let's talk about why you want that workshop. Let's talk about what are the desired outcomes of that training? What are the desired outcomes of what this engagement that we're going to do? Because if you just need to check off your Black History Month box, I'm all set. But if you want to really talk about this idea of diversity, linguistic diversity, because we don't talk about that enough, I'm all for it, because now we're talking about learning goals as opposed to box checking.
This could be it.
The one in the front named Anaya.
Yeah, and then this person right here. Yeah. So right in the middle first, and then this person with the purple. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Anaya.
It
is Anaya.
Think you made that
Yes,
clear.
it is Anaya. Hi, Professor. So just thinking about the field of linguistics, at least as far as I've been exposed to it so far at Georgetown, is largely a white field, and I'm thinking, at least especially in terms of the scholars who get credited with work and like get published and get recognized in terms of what's getting appreciated. So I'm thinking, where do you think linguistics still has to grow? Like, we see a lot of awesome work like this and the work that you're doing. Like, I think your class was one of the first classes that I was exposed to a lot of Black linguists and like what the work that they were doing. So I'm thinking, we're linguists, so we're like, okay, like, we have to bring awareness to these things, we have to appreciate these things, but then even in the field itself, there's still a lot of work to do. And I'm thinking, like, where else do you think linguistics needs to grow and has to grow?
Yeah, two things. I think Tony was absolutely right, is when we look at AI, we look at these speech recognition systems, we have to train them to understand the Black voice. And I don't mean just the tenor of our voices, right, or the cadence, but I really mean the linguistic structures, because we did some research with I did some research with Stanford, and we found that these automatic speech recognizers are 50% more likely to get the Black voice wrong than any other voice, right? And so that is an area, as we know, we're going to be using, you use your Alexa, you use your Google, whatever your thing of choice, right? You use that thing. Those things need to be trained beyond just, the white WHITE, not RIGHT voice, right?
Ooh,
and thank you. I did what I could. So I think that's an area. I think the other thing that we can do, especially if anybody is into research, cite Black authors, cite Black women.
Yes. And there are tons of them published beyond. I mean, in addition to Dr. Minnie Quartey, you got Geneva Smitherson.
Yep.
You've got who else we got?
Elaine Richardson.
Elaine Richardson.
Like there were 15 of them in the documentary. I've worked with probably 14 of them, right? These, especially the young, so what I love about this film as opposed to, as a kind of a close out, so in the beginning films, you're gonna see a lot of the older linguists, right? In this film, you see a lot of the linguists who are my age, who are my generation, because it really is kind of the changing of the guard. And so really and it doesn't take much to find a Black scholar, look at their work, appreciate their work, incorporate their work. That is one way, and it's a very small way, but that stuff matters in academia. It matters how many citations you get.
Mind their references, mind them joints. Who's in there?
Look, when you read something, look at that is one way. I think the other, and that's one space, and I think the other reason, I'll talk about Georgetown, the reason it was so important for me to teach the class, and I can tell you how it came about, is if anybody has taken a college class on linguistics or language and culture, you get the 1 week on Black English, the 1 week, right? But you got all these classes that have the 1 week, and I said, now we got all these classes with the 1 week. When are we gonna have the course that's 1 semester? Nice. And so I went to my advisor at the time. I was a grad student. I went to my advisor and said, hey, I would like to teach a course on African American language. She said, okay, propose it. I proposed it, they taught it. And the reason that it's important is because it is Georgetown's linguistics department is all white. Minus it fluctuates, right? But for the most part, the tenured faculty are all white. And so I think it's really, really important for me, right? That's not my jam, is to go full-time academia, but it's important for me to teach my class every now and then and every then and now, because you always need a little pepper in your salt. And so I think it's really, really important to find those opportunities and encourage others to find those opportunities. That's how we're going to continue to get the word out about scholarship. Tony's giving you, this book is great. I haven't read the new one yet, so, because he didn't give me an advance copy or what. I ain't gonna say nothing, but I did say something. But look at our dissertations, right? Seriously. Like they matter. The work I did with Coral, the Corpus of Online Regional African American Language, it looks at different parts of the country and different parts of how we speak African American language in DC versus Detroit versus California versus Atlanta. Use those resources, because the more traffic we get, the more funding, barring kind of our current situation, we have to be real, but those types of things, that's what drives it. The work Tony's doing right now, find out about those kinds of projects. That's what's going to continue to create this space for young Black linguists.
For sure. And I'll just flex real quick. The article that I put in Journal of Negro Education, you all should know, is a literature review. I am an academic. I got a PhD. It's not a game. And so it is a synthesis of academic literature that specifically links African American vernacular English to the educational world. And so if you're interested in how these two things have been discussed in a period, I think the earliest article goes back to 1930 with William LeBeau, like some early stuff of his work, all the way up to John Rickford's stuff in the so it's a review of literature. So if you're looking for something to just kind of like get your foundation, at least within the space of education, that's available for you. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I did that on purpose, because I was like, at some point, 4 or 5 years from when I write this article, people are going to say, well, what happened? Whose work do I got to read? Here it is. You know, like, read this. Yeah, so. Oh. Yeah, here first. Yep, and then right here in the front.
Thank you. Thanks. I wanted to just ask about what you think about the linguistic influence of hip hop. And particularly, I have teenagers, and I'm also an English as a second language teacher for teenagers to young adults. And it's got global spread now, and so I hear my English as a second language students using language from hip hop. I hear my teenagers doing that, and I wonder if you think overall that reach has been a positive thing, or is it when non-African Americans are using it among youth like that, is that a respectful way to use it, or is it not, in your opinion?
That's like a double, triple barrel kind of question. I'll start by saying this. I'm a hip hop educator, which essentially means that I study and understand the history of the evolution of the culture. So first thing I'll start by saying, if we do not know in this room, hip hop is culture. Hip-hop culture's music is rap music. And when I say culture, y'all, I'm talking about values, philosophies, dress, foods, right? I was born in 1981. I know I look great. Thank you very much. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s wearing baggy pants, my hat to the back. I'm saying words like dope, fresh, fly, homie, right? I'm doing like the Roger Rabbit and a Running Man, and I'm rapping music. I'm absorbing culture. I think that's the first thing I want to share. And so within that culture is language, right? And so without a doubt, if you are at least 50 years old, you don't know a world without hip hop in it, which means hip hop is also most likely a part of your culture, especially if you're someone who's absorbing popular culture. So for me, when we're talking about the culture of hip hop and its language, for me, that is inclusive of so many people. But what people need to be mindful though is the culture was created from Black and brown people who are resisting racism and oppression and you know what I mean? And so just know that the culture in which that language was created was from something that needed to be about justice, about optimism. Hip hop is about peace, love, unity, and having fun. It's about being a DJ and a rapper and an MC and a breakdancer and having a philosophy called knowledge of self, right? Shout out to KRS-One and Africa Bambaataa and all them. But within hip hop culture, there is a philosophy that says the more you know about who you are, the more powerful you can show up in the world. As long as we're talking about hip hop from the perspective of it as a broader global culture, I'm cool with it, right? Because I think that allows people to have an analysis of the culture contextually. They can understand like, oh, this is language. This is cultural language. When I'm talking about Body So Bootylicious by Beyonce, that's cultural language. I'm not going to yell at somebody for saying bootylicious, right? You know what I mean? But I will say that relatedly, because I think that it's funny, because not even funny, but there's a beacon here at Planet Word around words that matter, and one specifically that I wrote that talks about the use of the N-word and sort of its place within the hip hop context. And I will say that I firmly believe in in-group, out-group. Right, I do believe in that. I believe so. There's some words that just ain't for everybody, you know. And like okay, like just keep it in your circle. Me and my grandmama use the N-word with each other, and it's never bad. And I will never ever tell this woman there's something wrong with her. But I'm like, there's something to be said about in-group, out-group. I mean, just understanding that. So yeah, that's my answer, I guess, in some regard. Yeah, but also shout out to you for recognizing that they're using it within that space and you're celebrating it. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Hello, thank you again, y'all, for this has been great thus far. I have a question about literacy and linguistic bias, and if you all have any thoughts behind, because I'm a reading specialist and a linguist, and I have like a good number of my students over the past 17 years, like my intervention classes are often Black and brown students. And so I believe that linguistic bias.
You good. You can just keep talking.
But I want to know your thoughts on that.
So remember I just said about linguistic diversity. If your focus is linguistic diversity, I'm all for it, right? And so when I think about this idea of the classroom, and I don't remember who said it in here, but when I talk about education and I talk about this idea of thinking about who is in what spaces, right? Disproportionately, Black and brown children are put into special ed.
Yes.
Why? Because they come with a different language to the classroom. Going back to my German and French student, we evaluate them unfairly. I'm gonna give you an example. This is a personal example, but I hope it will make it irrelevant. 2016, I had a stroke, and it was a severe stroke. So on a scale of 0 to 35, I believe it was like a 29. So it was very severe. And my speech that was the last thing it took for me to get back. And so my colleagues have been really great. And I was dropping my daughter off at summer camp, and there's a donut shop. And so I was like, oh, well, let me get some thank you donuts for my colleagues to take them, to the office. And so I'm in line, right? And at that point, my speech was really bad, and it was really slow, and like it was slurred. And the guy behind me was like, hurry up, retard. Tell me what gave him the idea that I had diminished mental capacity and capabilities. The only thing, because I had no physical manifestation, he heard my speech. So we talk about this idea of bias, right? We talk about this idea of thinking about special ed. That's the reason I bring that up, because for me, that clearly showed me how people view you when they don't appreciate the language that you speak, or how you speak the language, or what they think or perceive the language how it should be spoken, or what language you should be speaking. And so when I think about the classroom space and how, when these young people bring the way they talk to mom and them, into the classroom and the teacher can't appreciate that they're bringing a different linguistic tool to the classroom. So I'm going to try to take away your screwdriver instead of celebrating that you're bringing a screwdriver, but I'm also going to give you the hammer, right? And so for me, I think it's incumbent upon us to say, these little kids are bringing screwdrivers. I know we want them to use hammers, but let's teach them how to use both tools and navigate. Because I think that's what's going to be super, super helpful. And the fact that you're doing this work and your students are disproportionately Black and brown, you are the one who has the space and you have the power to celebrate their screwdriver and their hammer. And if they're going to put them in your class because they don't fit in other spaces, create a space that fits for them in your space. And I think we have to be the ones who acknowledge that the bias is real. When you see disproportionate numbers in special ed, when you see disproportionate numbers of behavior problems. So what was my child's behavior? Oh, well, they were talking aggressively. No, they were quipping. They were playing the dozens. That's not talking aggressively. That is cultural. That is a cultural display of culture, right? So that's where you get to take that space. And I know this is a Pollyanna view, right? I'm aware that I'm kind of saying it in a Pollyanna way, but the ultimate thing is they exist. They exist. Linguistics is the only, not true so much, but linguistics is a very easy way to have covert racism manifested in the education system, manifested in the workplace, right? Manifested in the court. And so because I don't appreciate how you speak, I'm going to treat you differently. Oh, okay, I'm not going to say that it's because you're Black or it's because you're brown. I just don't like the way the words are coming out your mouth. And so that's exactly it. So they're going to bring those, they're always going to be present. I think there has to be some intentionality about how you use them, how you combat them through, once again, doing Black work, celebrating brown people's work. And brown could be a spectrum of things, right? I think that's how we're going to have to combat and help shift those perceptions.
And with an African American vernacular English, have them your reading specialist. I was thinking so much about the work of Langston Hughes and the work of Paul Laurence Dunbar and Phyllis Wheatley and so many other Black writers who wrote specifically in African American vernacular English so that those words showed up also on the page for a lot of those reluctant readers who might not, at least they'll be able to see how the words in their head sound, how it's spelled out on the page. Right? It sort of gives them a sense of identity, which is in this book. I'm going to promote this book, but I think I'm going to spit a poem too.
And can I say one more thing?
Wrap it up. That's it. We're done.
Oh,
Wrap it up. Wrap it up.
I will say
we over here like, wrap it up. Wrap it up.
Record your students, right? Record them and let and transcribe their narratives as true as you can and use those as teaching tools. Because now what you're saying is your language, the way you show up in this classroom is valid enough to be an educational tool. And so it's not something that now I'm using as a stigma, and use it as a comparative, like, oh, this is how you show up in the classroom, and I love that. This is how this scholar shows up in the classroom. We can also appreciate that. What are some of the differences? And I think that could really help this idea of you can eradicate on your side, right? What other people do, you can't control that. But I think that may be also helpful to really give them ownership and agency in their narratives. And I'm sorry.
Beautiful. Round of applause, please. Round of applause. This was amazing.
Knucklehead, y'all, is a collection of poems to Black boys and men, especially the gay and queer ones, and to the people who love us. So if you love me, then this book is for you too. And if you want to learn to love me better, this book is for you too. But inside this book is the poem that you all saw me performing, well, a snapshot of it in this documentary. The title of that full poem is called Code Switched. And that poem I wrote while writing my dissertation. I was writing this section in my dissertation about the history of spoken word poetry in African vernacular English within the context of education. And then because of my way of knowing, because of my poetic way of knowing, I had to write this academic thing with all these 13 letter words and stuff, but then I also needed to write a poem, right? And so I wrote this poem while also writing my dissertation, and it's called Code Switch, and I put it inside this book. And the reason why I said this is I made sure that I wrote in African American vernacular English on purpose, because I wanted young readers to be able to see this. And so speaking of see this, y'all, it's really cool illustrations. There's a picture of a little Black boy, and there's words flying around all his head. Sounds like this. I actually know it by heart, but I just want to give y'all the visual, like me reading it, right? I don't have to imagine being Black. being brilliant and misunderstood by the same people who only seem to understand you after you've exfoliated. After you've scraped yourself down to the white meat to expose that layer of skin where color and soul meet, where my ancestors, whose tongues were split, pitchforked and code switched, learned to spit and speak and scream and stand on stages while the world bet and bid and bargained and debated about their ebony brains. And centuries later, I'm questioning my value, asking, is speaking like this even worth it? Y'all, I know what it's like to not know what words mean. I know what it's like to have letters chained together on paper, locked up heavy, sitting still, just sitting there not moving. I know what it's like to carry the burden of words on your back, to bow to prevent your bones from breaking beneath them. But y'all, I also know what it is like to know what words mean. I know what it's like to watch letters break dance on blue lines that look like horizontal skies cutting through white space. I know what it's like when words fly off the page and they land on your face. And I know all of this, y'all, because I'm a descendant of enslaved Africans. A people separated by their tongues on plantations on purpose. People who, this is why I got my book. People who, I know what it's like when words look like you because I'm a descendant of enslaved Africans, a people separated by their tongues on plantations on purpose, a people who published translations about their liberations through poems and songs on purpose, a people who prayed and protested and protected all the parts of black speech they couldn't speak in public, but they spoke in private through the spoken word on purpose. Y'all, there's a purpose to this poem. So white people, please stop telling me how your great-great-great-grandparents are Polish and Irish and Italian, because I think it comes from a place of privilege, and I don't know what place. I don't know what village of Mother Africa your ancestors might have pillaged, what great-great-great-great price they paid for my great-great-great-grandparents on that auction stage, but I know that I come from a people who persisted while they were being purchased on purpose. Y'all, there's a purpose to this poem. This poem is an apology for every beautiful black verb I tried to camouflage in white words. For every moment of my being, I ain't know who I was being, because being black meant that I was more than the white world that I be in, and being as though I'm a human being with a tongue trapped in a cage it ain't asked to be in. In fact, history tells me it was beat in, but this beat in my ancestors' bones, man, show I kept this beat in. So this poem then is an apology for the intellectual abuse that began in my youth. My ancestors would look down now and say, oh, but Tony, look at you. Standing on stages like we taught you. Flipping, folding, balancing, beaming, two different languages in the air. The American standard and black savoir-faire. It sure is impressive. It sure is distinguished. It sure is debonair. But to capture its essence in writing can't really be done. You need an audience there. A sanctuary of people willing to watch you wrestle and reconcile with yourself and your words, and to produce a publication so worthy of praise it deserves an applause. And I propose, y'all, I became the purpose of that poem. Thank y'all so much. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Minnie.
Thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you.